Welcome back to Boss Uncaged podcast. So offline, Mark and I were just kind of getting familiar with each other. I mean, this is probably like the best thing about podcasting is usually you'll meet someone the first time when you're actually having an opportunity to interview them. And when you have like the synergy that Mark and I have, it just kind of makes these episodes so much more um, great, so much more inspiring. So obviously we're going to talk about a lot of different things today. And you guys know I like to give a particular nickname to whoever I'm interviewing. So today it took me a minute to kind of break down a nickname for Mark. And literally I had to kind of read through all his contacts and go through all the social media. And then finally I was like, the only thing I could deem for him to be the type of boss would be the catalyst boss. So we're going to
Uh-huh.
talk about that here very shortly, but we're going to dive into that. So Mark, I want you to tell the audience a little bit more about you and what would you like to talk about today?
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for having me. It's a privilege and honor to be here, and I love that. I've had a lot of different nicknames in my life, specifically with my last name. I'll take the Catalyst boss any day. So that's that's great. So I basically am born and raised Colorado native. Not many of us, kind of a unicorn these days. Father of four. I've been active in the business world since I was right out of school. I went through university and came right into work, and have actually worked my entire youth heading into college as well. So sometimes people ask me, for how long have you been an entrepreneur? Probably since I was about 9 or 10 when I started my first lawn mowing business. And we ended up kind of running the racket in my neighborhood, had about 10, 11 yards that we mowed, and me and a guy named Mark Rukavina, who was a close friend of mine around the corner, and then delivered papers and parlayed that into an active life of working since I was very young. So I love work, and I also love the fruits of work. So I like to play, I like to travel, that kind of activity. I've had the unbelievable fortune to have worked in industry that allowed me to travel to so many different places, domestically and internationally. And I was part for the majority of my career, like 21 years, in a family business, multi-generational, that was in the decorated sportswear industry, which basically means we screen printed and embroidered, hats and sweatshirts and t-shirts, things like that. And that afforded me to travel all over the world, and I loved it. We went through bankruptcy, of all things, which happens. About 300 employees. I was a CEO. This is back in like 2008-9, when the market was contracting. At that point in time, I did what a lot of people do, having come out of that, which is, go into consulting, right? So I basically pivoted and reinvented myself and came out of that incredibly challenging period of basically a couple of years, and put a shingle on the wall and started consulting and coaching and advising organizations that initially were almost all family-owned businesses, because I had a lot of experience. All 7 members of my family, which were my parents and 4 siblings, and I were in the business.
Wow.
They said we had about 300 employees roughly at the end of it. And so it was an amazing experience. I was the CEO for the last decade, after my dad had retired, and unbelievable learning. I'm a huge believer in failing forward, and sometimes life, through its bruises, provide the greatest opportunities for learning, growth, insight. And that actually acted as a catalyst for what I've been doing for now since 2009, so the last 14 years. So, which is basically, I work in an advisory, coaching, consulting role, mostly with other business owners.
Wow.
So yeah.
I think that kind of gives us a hell of a segue and a lot of onions to unpack. And the one thing that I think that you forgot to mention is that you're a rugby coach. And I want to know, like, how does this kind of fill into this equation to all the business and development and traveling? When in the world do you have time to coach rugby?
Well, yeah. So thank you. It is, my passion has been rugby. I discovered it when I went to the University of Colorado at 18 years old as a freshman. I had played other sports throughout high school, and then I saw these crazy guys running around a field, and was like, that looks like a lot of fun. So I jumped out, I got involved. I played for 14 years. And then when my rugby playing career ended, I had young kids, and I've got 2 boys, 2 girls, and both my boys had played other sports, soccer, and tried lacrosse, and football, etc. But they were drawn ultimately to rugby. And so when they began to play, I made a commitment just to be as close to them as I possibly could, ultimately without interfering. I was never one of those, sideline dads who, had any delusions about my kids' athleticism. It was just like I wanted to be with them. I wanted to participate in their life. So I approached the high school. At this point, I had coached them when they were younger. And then when they got to high school, I approached the high school coach who has been the head of the program here in Denver East High School. And I said, hey, I'd love to participate. What could I do? And so the first year I just kind of arranged carpools for the younger kids, the sort of 14, 15, 16-year-old kids who couldn't drive. And then I stepped on the field my second year and have absolutely loved it. And, so many, so I'll say the essence of coaching rugby is very similar to the essence of coaching people who are owning a business, really. I say that with a sense that there's lots of different approaches. Mine is always sort of be in a place of observation, ask questions, and let the athlete or let the owner sort of discover their own path forward with, some guardrails around that. And, if the person deviates too far from the path, you can, bring some stories or some anecdotes in to get them back into the center of that lane. But yeah, so I've loved it. I'm actively coaching now. This is my 15th season at East High School, and lots of parallels. I'm actually in the process of applying to do a TEDx talk, and that talk was born out of something we have at the high school level called a think tank, which is bringing all the kids in, and we work on our brain and our mindset as distinct from working on our bodies and the physical part of the game. Because as we know, where your mind goes, your body follows. And so we do a lot of work at that level. And the club has an extraordinary history. We have been in the state championship finals. I think it's now 18 in the last 19 years. So, that's an attribute to the head coach and the coaching staff and their commitment to things like yoga, et cetera. So I could go on, as you can tell, for a long time, but it's all that sense of ultimately being committed to something greater than yourself. And that's what we stand for as a club.
I think it's definitely fascinating. I mean, you had brought up that you have 4 kids, and I would think, and again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think out of your 4 kids, I think Christopher is probably the one that kind of is following in your footsteps to a certain extent, right? He went to the same exact college you went to, right? He's playing rugby still. So it's kind of like, as a dad, looking at all the business opportunities you had, and obviously we'll talk about your other kids here shortly, but how do you feel about Christopher kind of indirectly following in your footsteps?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I hope I can instill in my kids is that sense of independence and, authoring your own book, right? You talked before we got on this call that you've been the author of 9 books, which is extraordinary, and there's something about that. And so, his path is his path for sure. And I hope that I can, in the most constructive way possible, provide influence and some, I'll just call it moral direction. And, kids watch everything. There's nothing they're not observing. And so hopefully over his time when he was in my house, he's no longer there. He owns a house in Denver and has his own life and career. But hopefully he saw enough things that as he builds his life, independent of our life, that he's been influenced in a way that allows him to have the courage, have the, the sense of wherewithal. And his mother is an entrepreneur as well. So he's got a lot of that entrepreneurial patterning, sorry. And so I think that's that always present influence. And I hope that, he finds a path to just do it his way. And ultimately I do this, and I'm guessing you do, for the sense of freedom that it creates. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you definitely hit upon something. And I mean, the fact that you have 4 kids, it gives you an opportunity to kind of diversify based upon their talents. So I want you to kind of travel back, and I want you to think, and I remember seeing this picture on your daughter Lexi's social media. And I think she was maybe like a couple months old. You had like no facial hair, you had like a baby face, you were holding her. Did you ever think that she would follow in your other footsteps, kind of stepping into the real estate realm?
Yeah, great question. No, I never thought that would be a place that she would stray and now call a career. And that's the whole thing, like I can tell you this from my own experience. The 5 of me and my 4 siblings swore to my parents we would never be involved in the family business.
Mm.
ever. And then all five of us were at a minimum involved for 20 years. So it's just what, be careful what you say, never to, right? And so again, I think what happened is, as I was involved in real estate and I got involved in real estate, a client of mine eventually ended up hiring me as the CEO president of the real estate company. And I did that a couple of different times at that same real estate brokerage. So when I came home, there was a lot of conversation about, houses and the market. And, it's an incredibly intimate industry if it's done well, right? And so I think what my daughter was drawn to is that ability to actually meet somebody at that level of intimacy with
Mm.
great service and great care. And she has an enormous heart for it and has, started a career and is off and running, which is wonderful to see.
Mm. Which kind of leads me to like your name. Like, and part of the reason why I picked this name out of everything that I read about you, I think the thing that really stood out to me was your bio. And it was a line that says, "Catalyst for change, inspiring leaders to embrace something leadership," if I remember correctly. I'm trying to, so like that right there in itself, I mean, I would think that's the epitome of who you are. And correct me if I'm wrong, but what does being the catalyst boss ideally means to you?
Yeah, I think, yeah, thank you for noticing those things in that bio. I think what that means is, I'll just talk briefly about my own experience. You know, I was tapped on the shoulder to run my family's business when I was 30.
Mm.
A couple hundred people in the business, $25 million. I had no idea what I was doing. And I knew I didn't know what I was doing, right? So I was admittedly, and at the same time with a 30-year-old ego trying to pretend like I knew, right? So I knew that if I was going to pull that game off, I had to go find somebody to help me. So I reached out and hired a coach in 1999 to help me see what I couldn't see. And what I discovered in that process is, we are, as each of us individuals, far more complex
Mm.
than we would know if we didn't start digging into really who we are. It was that inward journey that allowed me to come back into the business and just be more effective as a leader. And had I not taken that time to ask hard questions or be asked hard questions and then work through the answers to those questions, I would have never discovered that. So this idea of catalyst is, it's a chemical reaction. It's something that happens and there's energy that, evolves out of that. And so I think the whole idea of the work that I do is really slowing down. I say this all the time. I know people who are like in the process of growing businesses with a lot of clients. Mine is, I like to slow down to the speed of the client that's in front of me. And I have a really small practice by comparison. But that sense of, I want to be with somebody so that we can have a conversation where the right question at the right time ignites this thing inside them that all of a sudden has them being stuck and going from stuck to unstuck. And when you watch somebody go, and I can speak to this personally, from being stuck, whatever it is, to being unstuck, all the momentum that, follows that and what opens up for that person in their business, in their life, is extraordinary. And then it's just like, me, get out of the way. So, when I was younger, and I say this openly, I've apologized to many of my clients when I was first doing this, because I thought I was 40 when my family's business went through bankruptcy, came into this coaching consulting business, and was still driven by ego, right? And a lot of young, sort of male energy, trying to be right, trying to look smart, look good, avoid looking bad. So I would, in my coaching approach, would try to impress upon people that I knew something that would be of benefit to them. What I've learned over doing this for 14 years is the best thing that I can do is ask a phenomenally effective question and then let silence and the space that silence creates be the catalyst for whatever that person's working through. And so I have to resist trying to fill that space, trying to answer, trying to look smart, which is no longer an effort for me. It's just part of naturally how I occur when I'm working with somebody. But that, I think it's that level of patience and letting that person work through it that creates that spark that ends up with that chemical reaction, which I would refer to as a catalytic moment.
Wow. I mean, just listening to you speak, kind of like it's just so funny how this episode is unraveling itself, right? Listen to you speak, I can kind of tell that your alter ego would have been like a historian for like the Discovery Channel, right? And so it kind of leads me into like your travel experiences. And if anyone has ever followed like what you're doing with travel and the pictures that you take and the way you're documenting your videos, I would say that you have a real love for history with a keen eye for architecture, more so in the Gothic era. So I want to kind of talk about like where does that passion kind of come from? Is it coming from like your real estate back end, or is it just like the first time you went to Spain and you saw that these beautiful churches, did you just fall in love with that art form?
I love it. So I'll tell you where the origin comes from. When I was a young kid, there was a summer camp up in the mountains called Geneva Glen in Colorado, and they had this session called Knighthood, and it was all about the Arthurian legend of the knights at the Round Table. And so, just the idea of King Arthur and Lancelot, and the majesty of it all, I became obsessed as a little boy with all those things. Like, that is not uncommon. Like, knights and dragons and all that stuff. Anyway, and part of that is the architecture and that old, stone cathedral, look. And so it began with my appreciation and being drawn to that in England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales in particular. And then, last year, after both my parents had died, I made a pledge to go walk something called the Camino de Santiago, which is a historical 1,000-plus-year-old pilgrimage from the border of France and Spain to the coast of Spain. And as I walked the Camino, and I didn't make it all the way, I made it 365 of the 500 miles. I had plantar fasciitis in both feet, which ended my walk prematurely. I will go back and complete it. But as I walked through these towns and cities, I was just struck with how much history, and so much of it in the form of the architecture, the churches, the buildings, the town halls, and then just like the avenues. You'd go down and you'd see these streets that were 500 years old, and people have been living in those neighborhoods for that entire time. So it was all that just kind of drew me. And I couldn't recommend, slowing down and going for that kind of a introspective walk more highly. It was a life-changing experience for me in all the right ways. So that's where it came from.
Yeah, and I think like I'm leading into like the development of who you are and how you articulate things to where you're helping companies at scale with coaching, because it takes a lot of information to be able to do that. You have to be very versatile, very diverse. You have to kind of step into the roles of a CMO to a CEO to a CFO to a C. You got to jump into all these different roles at any given time. So I kind of want to get into like a little bit more of a personal topic in relation to this, is kind of like being that your brain is much like how my brain is. Like, we take data, we hold on to data, and we regurgitate data to make things easier for the person that we're talking to help them with their process. But your mom kind of suffered from dementia. So I want you to kind of talk about, with you being so mentally aware, how has that affected you, knowing that she kind of was losing her memory to a certain extent?
Yeah. First, I mean, my heart goes out to anybody who has somebody they love who, finds themselves traveling down the path of really losing themselves through some form of dementia. Alzheimer's being the most commonly referenced form of dementia. To be witness to it was moving. Really broke my heart. And also, you have to find humor in it as well. I mean, there were a lot of humorous moments, as there were sad ones. What I think I would say as my reflection is, tending to my body, my health, my mind, with the hopes that I could stave off that final chapter in my life. My dad died at 88, and his mind at the end of his life was as sharp as it was when, he was a young man. And my mom, for whatever reason, I don't think, doctors know why, just had a different path in the last final chapter of her life. But to watch somebody go through it, and know that I'm helpless, I'm powerless, and then just figuring out, how can I support my mom with an end of life process that's filled with grace and love and dignity while her mind unravels. And I will say, I love to read, and there's a book called Being Mortal by a guy named Dr. Atul Gawande. And I think he's a US born Indian doctor. Unbelievable book. And I've referred it to hundreds and hundreds of people, all who still have parents that are aging. And it's really his view into the end of life as a physician. And I could not recommend a book more highly for somebody who finds himself with parents who are, starting to show signs of their age. And ultimately we will all die, right?
Yeah.
And it's how do you guide or aid somebody as a son or daughter through that process with love, grace, and dignity. That's the best way I could describe it. And it's a beautiful book.
Wow. So, I mean, playing off of like the key word of everything that you said was empathy, right? And you're dealing with people in business to where some of them are like super agers, right? They could be like 100 years old and they'll be as sharp as a whistle like your dad. But some of these business owners, they may think that they're pretty sharp, but they're starting to age out. And being that you have the empathy with your mom, have you experienced that as a hurdle dealing with anyone that is a CEO or executive level that thinks they know, but they really don't understand?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's not uncommon that you have, let's just call it, I'll say a founder. I'm using more of a non-public, but a privately held, family-owned business where the founder has really wrapped their identity and their sense of, community, self-worth into the creation of an organization that they end up aging into. And yeah, then usually what happens, you have a younger generation, maybe even two generations, who, want to both simultaneously honor all of that while at the same time find a way to, with grace, hopefully, and love, transition that person out of that role. I hate to even use this as a phrase, but sometimes that person who's in that last phase can become a hindrance, an obstacle, can become almost adversarial at times. Tend to get more stuck in their ways and less flexibility. And so having somebody to come and assist with that is enormously helpful, because it's a really difficult path to walk, because you've got that sense of deference to your parents. I mean, they're the ones who created it. You're inheriting or helping somehow buy it out from them, and you're trying to honor them, and still you want to express yourself. That's a tough window. And I have had that experience a handful of times.
So I mean, I want to kind of dive into that some more, right? And based upon like your visual representation. I mean, your beard, it's seasoned, right? And kind of going back to the picture with your daughter and the picture with both your kids. I think you guys are like on a roller coaster ride or something like that. Like the way you look now is not the way you look when you were younger. So is that something that's helpful for that older generation for you to bridge the gap with the younger generation as being the medium between both?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, I normally don't have this pronounced of a beard. I am in Fiddler on the Roof, and I'm part of this rich Jewish community who is part of the overall cast. So we were, as men, required to grow a beard. I have usually a really, really well groomed, short kept beard, but this is all part of we go. Our first performance is September 21st, and so that's what's going on here. But I will say that the gray or the white, which is actually more white than it is gray, is, I think, comforting to some people. It's obviously off-putting maybe to others, but I do find that when I'm in conversations with more mature, seasoned, as you use the word, I love that. I'm going to start using that word. Owners and executives, I think there's a sense of identification, and that can create, this sense of just relaxing a little bit more into the conversation. Once we start the conversation, I've had the opportunity, and I feel unbelievably blessed to have been in a leadership role, either owning or running, 5 different organizations. And that comes out, I've gone through bankruptcy, which is the single biggest fear that every single entrepreneur faces. And, so there's a disarming sense of telling that story openly. I used to hide it but that was more me trying to pretend like it didn't happen or somehow something else was involved. But, it is what it is. And I've learned to embrace it. And I share it openly because it brings a sense of, okay, we're not going to sit here and try to impress one another, right? It's like, how can you come in and provide wisdom, which is what I would say I have more of now than I did when I was younger, to help me through a set of circumstances that I'm not able to navigate on my own. And
Mm.
so I think that seasoned beard, whether it's long like it is now or kept real short when I normally have it, it accomplishes all that. I don't use it as that because I hate shaving. That's the
Yeah.
bottom line.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of men do, and that's my reason.
Hmm. I think kind of playing off what you said, like, you have more wisdom now, but I think indirectly, subconsciously, you had wisdom even in college. Because if I remember correctly, like your fraternity, everything that you're depicting is pretty much what your fraternity stood for. So I want you to kind of, I think the standards were like friendship, scholarship, leadership, and service of thought
Yeah.
for our lives. So I want you to kind of talk about, like, is that something that was consciously done while you were in college, or was it just kind of something that you kind of just fell into and now you're utilizing it in your later days?
Well, what I would say is I would give 100% credit to my parents,
Mm,
who, when I was being raised, had a home environment that was foundationally rooted in love.
mm,
And I speak about this openly as that being one of the most phenomenal unfair advantages as a young man growing up. You and I both know that
mm,
there's all other kinds of circumstances that exist in homes. I just happen to be blessed to be in a family that had values, a certain ethos, siblings to keep me in check, parents to reinforce it. So by the time I got to college,
mm,
I already knew what I was in pursuit of. So, those values, that sense of ethos and ethics aligned with all the things that my parents instilled in me when I was a boy. And I think it's been consistent. And I've had a history. If it doesn't line up that way, I'm very quick to name it, address it, and then exit
mm.
in pursuit of restoring those values and that sense of ethos. And I've done it multiple times and I would continue to do it. And I'd encourage anybody who feels like they're in a place where there's dissonance, like who it is that I say that I am, isn't in alignment with the experience I'm having in my work, in my relation, wherever it is. That's a signal. And a lot of people ignore those signals. And you and I both know that unfortunately, what happens if you ignore those signals for too long, people can tend to become cynical, angry, frustrated, divisive, all those kind of things, right? So I just say, call a thing, end it,
Mm.
open up a new door, have the ability to just trust and move. And, life tends to typically meet you at that level of action.
Oh, wow. I think you made a statement about, knowing who it is that you say you are. So I want you to kind of take with that reference point to articulate just using 3 to 5 keywords to identify who you are.
Yeah. Wow. It's a great question. I'd say uh, a father is what, and I mean, well, really, it's a caretaker. I would define myself in virtually every environment as somebody who's constantly looking out for other people. I used to do that to my own expense. Now I've figured out, after 56 years of living, how to balance both of those things. Um, I'd say I'm curious, phenomenally curious. And that's been since I was a little kid. I used to sit at the table, unlike my other 4 siblings who'd be playing. My parents would have a dinner party, and I would sit at the table almost precociously and ask questions of the adults who were there because I wanted to know. And then creative. I love being creative. Music, rugby as a coach, incredibly creative in my work with clients. All that's happening in the moment. None of it is scripted, and there's an enormous amount of creativity in it. So yeah, caretaking, and all those things. That's how I curious and creative.
Hmm. Hmm. So I think one of the key things you said, and you brought it from, like, and again, I'm going to kind of bring these things together, right? We talked about your mom and dementia. and the empathy for that, and then how you're utilizing what you learned from that experience to honestly help aging founders. And then in addition to it, like one of your kids also has special needs. So again, you have like the epitome of empathy and being cautious with what you say, how you say, when you say it, because you know there's cause and effects. I want you to kind of talk about, is that something that obviously you said earlier on you got from your parents, or is it something that you became very conscious of and made a conscious effort moving forward?
Yeah, I will credit a woman. Her name is Susan Scott. She wrote a book called Fierce Conversations. And there's many different lessons to be gained from reading that book. One of them that when I read it, is like, oh my goodness, that so resonates with me, is that every single word we are using, every word that you and I are using in this conversation is either moving us towards what we want in life or away from what we want in life. And so, actually, at one point in time, my son, who's now 22, started a business as a young guy called Words Matter. It didn't go anywhere other than sort of a school related experiment, but the idea was that words matter. Every word matters. So being thoughtful, being conscious really of what comes out of my mouth, the way it comes out of my mouth, how it will be heard when it goes through your ears and received. I think that is a hallmark of the way I approach virtually every conversation. I don't care who it's with, because I think when I'm in relationship, another axiom that she has is, the relationship is the conversation. Absent conversation, there's no context for relationship, which I love that idea. And so with that, I want to be incredibly mindful, responsible, and conscious for every word that comes out of my mouth.
Hmm.
That's my approach.
So the son that you just brought up, was that Devin?
Yeah, that's Devin. Yeah.
Huh. Definitely interesting. So I mean, it's kind of like as a parent myself, we always kind of look to see like what our kids are going to do with their lives. Are they going to be like us? Are they going to take what they learn from us and kind of grow and prosper? And so far, we've kind of documented like three of your four kids so far of kind of taking like what you've done and it has influenced them. So I want you to kind of think about a time that you would like to go back to, right? To talk to your younger self. If you say you were in your early 20s, like your kids are now, is there something that you would like to change, and what would that thing be to change?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I appreciate the question, because the minute you said that, I have a total experience. And I say this broadly to anybody who's in a family business where you've been given an opportunity as a second generation or third generation family member to be invited into participating in the business, right? And the older version of myself now wishes I could go back and tell my younger version to not try to be so smart, not try to be so right, slow down, be patient, listen. Slow down, be patient, listen to the wisdom my father had, gathered over years of running a small family owned business and making all kinds of mistakes and also having all kinds of successes that I didn't want to give any of that time.
Mhm.
I just wanted to do it my way. I was, anyway. So I think it's that young ego. I wish I could tell my younger self, relax. You don't need to work to impress everybody as much as you think you do. Right? Hey, everybody's not paying attention to you anyway that way. So,
Yeah.
and I think that would be the case. Yeah.
Wow. So you talk about the turtle and the hare, right? I mean, like the slowing down like the tortoise, which kind of is interesting because didn't a friend give you a rabbit at one time?
Yes. Yeah. There have been a couple different animals that I've been given as
Yeah.
gifts. And I put that in air quotes because, somebody gives somebody an animal to care for, thinking it's a gift. And it's like what it requires is a lot of responsibility. So, but yes, that's a true story.
So I want you to kind of talk about like the experience of an entrepreneur, and they're listening to you right now, and there's always a perception of you being an overnight success. And so I want you to kind of talk about the documentation of how long it took you to become who you are, where you are right now.
Yeah, there's again, I'll reference another book, Good to Great. There's some questionable references that Jim Collins makes now to some of the organizations in that book, but there's this idea of um, putting your hands on the wheel. And what he's talking about is a huge grist mill, which used to grind wheat into flour. And you got your hands on that thing and you're pushing and you're pushing and you're pushing. It could take years. And I don't know when the breakthrough occurs, right? Going from effort to something that would feel effortful, but with flow, right? So things have a greater sense of ease about them because you move past that sort of threshold. And so I have a multitude of different organizations to think about that way. I went to my family's business as an origin story. My dad had that business for 50 years. And for, say, 27 years, it was him with his hands on that bar, pushing. It was a small company, maybe 6 to 7 people, $1.5 million in revenue. And then what happened is when all of my siblings and I came into the business, it went from that to, $25-30 million business. But all those decades of work are what created the possibility for that to happen, right? Without that work and that foundation, none of it would have been possible. Now, if I think about it from, my own practice, right? I mean, it was years of trying to figure out, hey, what am I doing? What is my offering? Who are my clients? What is my service? Who do I want to show up being when I'm delivering it? I took years of figuring out, right? And I'd still say I'm constantly in a state of reinvention and reimagining, as the market changes, and as conditions change. If I thought about it, so I'm also a partner, part owner of a startup company in Dublin, Ireland right now. It's a fast casual restaurant chain. And, we have been working at this for a very long time, and all kinds of challenges, capital structure, we've got great leadership, COVID was involved in that whole period. So, adversity coming from many different angles. When COVID hit, the government shut down and we couldn't get anything moving through that. Meanwhile, we've got all kinds of cash going out for rent that we're paying on, an unutilized building or two. And it's like, you can name them 1,000 times over. And I listened to one of your earlier podcasts and I love what this guy said, because this is my experience. He said, you're either in a problem, you just completed a problem, or you're waiting for one. And problem may not have been the right word. It could have been challenge. And I was in my family's business for 20 years. I can think of 1 month out of 20 years where everything was firing on all cylinders. And it was almost like this, moment like, oh, it's like 1 month out of 20 years. And so I love that. To me, that's the juice of life, is to be working with challenges and adversity and breakdowns and breakthroughs, et cetera. So that to me is where the joy is. Although I will say I love that 1 month too.
Yeah. Again, I'm just listening to you, kind of going back to what I said earlier about you kind of being a historian without even thinking about it. And I could totally see, and I'm gonna make a depiction. I'm gonna tell a story, right? And I'm hoping that this story is not gonna be fiction for too long. I'm seeing a cover of a book, kind of like a wireframe blueprint with some like buildings being structured, and each phase of this building is layering into what you do and how you do it. So it leads me to, why haven't you produced an actual book as yet?
That's a great question. And just to answer it directly, probably fear that what I would have wanted to write or what I've thought about writing 1,000 times over somehow doesn't live up to an expectation that I've created in my own mind. There's a brilliant book by a guy named Stephen Pressfield called The War of Art. If you have not read it, as an author, it's a fantastic book. It just talks about, really, in essence, the force of resistance showing up whenever a human being's up to something. And thus far, in my endeavors to be an author and write that book or any other version of it, I have lost the battle up to this point in time with resistance. And I'm working through that literally as we speak. So I am in the middle of another reinvention and pivot that includes what you just named, along with some other changes in how I go into the world. So more from a on the stage, public speaking, keynote speaking approach than what I've been doing up to now. So, but I appreciate the question, and yeah, I've written 1,000 books, and there's a great quote, you probably are quite familiar with it, that most people go to their grave with their song still in them. And I don't know who the author or the creator of that, but that to me is like one of the most devastating thoughts. And I tend to live life pretty full out, right? I coach rugby. I'm in a adult rock choir, which is a whole other thing. I'm in this musical. There's a lots of life that I take on, and I love to travel extensively, and yet I feel like this one thing is right there, and I know it's there. I'm 56, soon to turn 57 in a few weeks, and I know that the runway is not as long on that side of life as it was behind me. So I got to get busy.
Well, first of all, happy early birthday.
Thank you.
And in addition to that, I would say just by the context of the way you're documenting your videos of a church in Spain or the architecture in Ireland, you could easily do that for what you're doing in business. I mean, you could definitely hear your passion in that, and you can hear your passion in what you're doing. I would just say bring both worlds together.
I love it. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. And you've obviously cracked the code 9 times over, which is, my hat's off to you. And I'm inspired, moved by what you've done. And so, I'd love to figure out what you used
Mhm.
and accessed when you were thinking about your first book, let alone your 9th one, right? There's something there that is just unbelievable to me.
Yeah, yeah. And to answer that question really shortly, it's a shift in state of mind. Like the first book is always under the premonition of being perfect or being like another book. And you have this vision of how the book should go, and then it'll end up taking way longer than it should. And then once you get that out your system, book number 2 is like a fraction of the time. Book number 3 is a fraction of that. And then once
Yeah.
you get to the point about 5 or more books, they're systematized. Like there's very systematic ways of creating books after you understand the process.
Well, it's interesting. So, one of the things that I do as a part of my passion as a vocalist is I sing the national anthem.
Mm.
I've sung it many times in large venues and, public, to kick off an event. And I remember the very first time I went to do that, I was petrified.
Mm.
And then once I had the experience, mostly because a lot of people, forget the lyrics. It's the national anthem, and they get up there and they freeze and they forget the lyric. It just happened at a major, like either NFL game or MLB game or something. World-renowned artists forget lyrics. So I was with this story in my head, and I broke through that fear. And then it was like, once that happened, it's like, oh yeah. And then I just fell into this cycle of, putting myself out there. I wouldn't go as far as saying soliciting, but almost to the level of soliciting that as something that I wanted to have as part of my life. And I still do it. I had the gift of being able to sing the national anthem at the state championship for both my sons who were in the state championship at the high school rugby level, which was a blast. I've done it at military installations and change of leadership. And yeah, it's been a great gift.
I think it's definitely fascinating. I mean, we're talking about fear, but you overcoming fear in one aspect, and in the other aspect is more so fear of not being perfect. So I want you to kind of talk about words of wisdom to an entrepreneur that's listening, and being that you have 30 years plus of experience, to get them to understand the state of mind is to execute and not to prolong the execution, to kind of get something and then let that evolve, learn from it, learn that example, and move forward.
Yeah, I'd say what I've distilled out of years of both being an active entrepreneur, business owner, et cetera, is 3 words, probably: commitment, right? You really need to know what it is that you're committed to, and then being consistent in with whatever it is that you're doing to move you towards the set of goals you set for yourself, whatever they are. And then that sense of, compassion. Compassion with yourself, right? And I always tell people, we can only know what we know. We cannot know what we don't yet know. You cannot have experienced what you have not yet experienced. Yet we hold ourselves often in judgment and for failing. For people say all the time, well, I should have known that. How could you possibly have known that? You've never encountered that. You can only, now you know something that you didn't know before, and you can add it to your lexicon of things you know. And, so I think there's that sense of compassion, recognizing I'm on a journey, I'm going to fail, hopefully as much, if not more, than I succeed. As long as I fail forward and remain committed and am consistent, I'll work through all those bumps and, continue to endeavor. And if the cause and the product or the service is something that the market feels has value, at some point in time, there's a moment you'll break through. So that's what I would say.
So with them discovering you and like with all the empathy and all the experience and all the success that you've had, where does a listener then get in contact with you?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, the easiest thing to do, probably go to my website, which is, MX, the number 5, followed by consulting.com. And the MX stands for Musselman. That's my last name, right? And the 5 is, when I came out of that bankruptcy, what I knew is no matter what I did for the rest of my life, I always went forward with the strength of my 4 siblings. I knew that, at some point in time, my parents would die, but I'd always have this unbelievable foundation, and I can reach out to anyone and do all the time for counsel, for, holding me accountable, for, pushing against thoughts that I have, encouragement, all that stuff. So MX Musselman times mx5consulting.com. My email address is mark@mx5consulting.com. And those are probably the 2 easiest ways. And you can go on to, LinkedIn, and it's under my name, Mark Musselman. So that's another way too.
So kind of going into some bonus questions. I mean, you've had 30 years of achievements. I mean, from like your kids where they are right now to like your businesses. So I want you to kind of talk about what is your most significant achievement outside of your kids currently today.
Wow. I'm going to tell it this way. So I had a bucket list, and this goes back to this idea of my life. My biggest passion is music by far. I mean, rugby, close second, but, other than family. And I live in Colorado. So we have a performance venue called Red Rocks. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but Red Rocks is, for most performing artists globally, one of their marquee places. And I mentioned I'm in this thing called an adult rock choir, and I've had it as a bucket list my entire life. And at some point, in some way, sing to a sold out Red Rocks auditorium from the stage. And a couple of years ago, thanks to the incredible work by Jill Tees, who's the founder, and her partner and a few other people, we were given that opportunity, and I was able to sing a duet with a woman who is a remarkably talented artist, to a completely sold out 10,500 arena filled, and that was a major accomplishment. And so that was like a culmination of years of vocal performance in lots of different environments. So that would be the biggest accomplishment.
So if my memory serves me correctly, and I'm trying to kind of like visualize the things that I've learned about you and going through all the different images that I saw, isn't that the black and white image that's at the header of your Facebook page?
That is 100%. It's me and the view out into the audience from that experience. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, I was looking, I couldn't dial in the reference point to it. I think that Bob or Bobby had made a comment about singing, but I didn't see anything else about singing. So but I mean, you brought it to our attention. So it's definitely, for that to be your largest achievement, it's definitely pretty significant considering that image was there and I remembered it.
Well, right. And the crazy part about Red Rocks is there's a place underneath the stage. They call it the catacombs. I think they call it the catacombs. I call it the catacombs. But it's a hallway, and you go down there and you look at the photographs, and they have this wall of plaques, or little tiny like brass plaques with every single artist that's ever stepped on stage. And it is just like the who's who of, from the 1950s until now. I may have even gone before the 50s, I don't recall, but I mean, everybody that you would name, who has, been. And so it's like a museum.
Hmm.
And it is extraordinary. So in that company, unbelievable experience.
Got it. Which goes back to you being a historian. Like your subconscious mind, still a historian.
Yep. Full circle.
Yes. So I want you to kind of think about this next question, kind of leaving off of like that pinnacle moment. If you had an opportunity to spend 24 hours with anyone, someone from your past, someone that's dead, someone that's alive, someone that you may have met or never met, but you get to spend 24 hours with them, who would it be and why?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And my answer would be Barack Obama. I am phenomenally inspired by his story,
Mm,
his demeanor, his intellect, his commitment to family, the brilliance of his wife, the grace of his kids, and the pioneer of being the first Black man to ever step into that role with such dignity. And I mean, I have reverence for
mm,
him, and not just him, but the entirety of his family. And I don't think as a nation, we really fully understood the significance of those 8 years. You know, virtually, uh, you know, free of any kind of episode that would have challenged integrity. Yeah, I could go on for a long time,
yeah.
but that's who I would love to sit down with. He fascinates me in all the right ways.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, the fact that it wasn't one term, it was two terms, it kind of puts things into scope to a certain extent. It's definitely interesting to say the least, right?
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, it pushes against every part of the history of our nation, and
mhm.
even with his full name and all the things, and as he says, skinny kid from the South. I mean, yeah, just unbelievable. So
Phenomenal answer. I mean, believe it or not, I've interviewed like 400 people, and this is the first time I've heard Obama. So it's definitely
interesting. Yeah, that's
very
me because I think there's a lot of other people. MLK would certainly be another one that I think is Gandhi would be a person. I mean, I could get down the list and name a whole bunch of people, but for me right now in the world of like monumental achievements,
mhm,
like monumental, mind-blowing achievements, and then the way he comported himself
mhm.
as a man, as a father, as a husband, as an intellect was just incredible.
Yeah.
His oration skills are off the hook.
Well,
So
to your credit, he's still alive, so there's still opportunity.
yeah, sure, you bet. I love it.
There's still opportunity.
Yeah,
So going into closing, man, I like to give whoever I'm interviewing an opportunity to become the host of Uncaged podcast. So Mark, now you're the host and I'm your guest. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask me?
I do. I'd love to know what inspired you at the very beginning when this was not even a notion to commit yourself to all that it takes to host a podcast, and then the other challenge, which is to get people on for 400 recorded episodes.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of goes into my story, and I've told it many different ways, but it just really boils down to hitting that pinnacle point of life or death. And
Mm,
I faced death and I recovered from it. I came out of it. And at that time, it was like, what am I going to do now that I've seized the second opportunity? And
mm,
it was more so for me to, because of my wife now, who was my girlfriend at the time, we sat down, had a conversation about it. And she was like, well, it's probably time for you to brand you since you've been branding everyone else for the past 18 years. So I took that to heart and I started leveraging what I've always known how to do for clients. I started doing for myself. And I built
wow.
everything in the last 3 years on those principles of universal branding between a company brand, a personal brand, a product brand, a service brand. And what did that really look like? And Uncaged is the epitome of that. Like it's live and it's direct. And so I work with clients to explain like what I'm doing with Uncaged, you can do as well. And I'm leaving all the breadcrumbs out there for people to see that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I did not know that story. It would, as a person who defines himself somewhat as curious, I would love to know, more about that. Like, when you say you faced a near death experience, what else would you share about that on
Yeah,
this?
I had a
Yeah.
stroke. I, I,
Wow.
I had a stroke 2018. So, and it was just one of those things is being a native New Yorker and speaking fast and kind of running with the bustle. it took me about 18 months to get up to that because my face was drooped, my right hand was kind of way weaker than what it is. And then I had to kind of like physically learn how to do certain things and not realizing that like people they think about stroke as usually you get the random question, oh, is your heart okay? Like, it had nothing to do with my heart. It was the brain, which was the irony of it is like my intellectual side. I guess I kind of used my brain to its capacity at that point in time in life and kind of had to reset itself.
Yeah, that's incredible. I have a friend of mine who had a stroke at a young age, and I'd say yours was obviously at a young age, and relatively speaking. And if you thought about it through the lens of what was the single biggest obstacle or form of adversity you had to overcome to heal over 18 months, what would it have been?
Fighting the new state of something I never faced before, which was depression.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So just breaking that and again, like I'm strong-willed anyway. So like going into it, I kind of had more empathy for people that had said they had depression before I had that state of depression. And I thought I had a concept of it, but I really didn't concept it until I was in that moment. And I was like, damn. First of all, I was an asshole for the years previous because it's not something that you could control it, but it takes all the effort in the world at
Hmm.
the moment when it hits for you to kind of come out of that dark place or to come out that tunnel and then see the light at the end of it.
Yeah. Well, I found myself in the midst of the bankruptcy process going through what my psychiatrist that I hired to help me refer to as circumstantial or situational depression. And I was more manic depressive. So I was like on these crazy highs and then I crash. And yeah, I don't have a history of having any experience with mania or depression. And I lived that way for about 18 months.
Mm.
And it was hell.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But it kind of goes to show like the entrepreneurial spirit. I think like once they figure it out, like how to really clone individuals and take their state of mind and download it, the entrepreneur is a different breed of being. It's being able to face these regular every single day mundane stuff that people take for advantage and they go into the dark place and don't come out of it. But as an entrepreneur, we deal with it every day, all day. And at the end of every day, we come out of it willing to jump into it again tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to. I mean, the thing that I would take away from what you just shared, and thank you for sharing that, is having gone through that period of depression.
Mm.
I feel this way, at least. I don't want to speak for you, but I feel like um, there's a way to access other people
Mm.
who are in a similar spot. So I have a couple of family members who really struggle with depression. And, instead of being in a place where you meet that person with any form of, judgment, because still mental health is there's a lot of interesting ways as a society we still look at mental health, but just nothing but love, nothing but compassion, nothing but understanding, and then a wanting to help in any way I can. And that I may be powerless, right, to help them, but that's what it created for me because I didn't understand it,
Mm.
you
Yeah.
know, not before I experienced it.
Yeah, yeah. I think people they could read a definition of anything, but experiencing the actual reality of it is completely different than just looking at what Webster said about it.
Yeah, absolutely, no question. So thank you
Well,
for answering all those questions.
no, anytime, man. I definitely appreciate it. I think that like you're a hell of an entrepreneur, but you have so much insight, so much wisdom, and so if anyone that's listening, definitely if you were moved by this particular episode, you definitely want to reach out to Mark because again, you can't go wrong just by even having a 20-minute conversation with this man. So I
Well,
definitely should be on the show today.
thank you. That was a very nice thing you say. And again, I just acknowledge you, which I did before the show, as I've shared. Your systems and your process make it as a guest so welcoming and so effective. So I just want to thank you for all the effort you've put into what you've created as a platform. It's been a delight.